Charles Oliveira is the most electric finisher in MMA history, and he has been showing it since his earliest days. Oliveira burst onto the scene as a very young prospect. Though he was trading wins and losses in those opening years of his career, the dude had an insane submission skill set to dip into whenever he needed to. And when Eric Wisely made the mistake of tangling with Du Bronx on the mat, Charles was able to lock in an exceedingly rare submission, the calf slicer, one of the most painful techniques in any BJJ fighter's arsenal, a sub that puts a tremendous amount of pressure on your opponent's leg. Thankfully, Wisely was wise enough to tap quickly, if you'll forgive the pun. One of the biggest mistakes a fighter can make inside the cage with Charles Oliveira is letting him take a hold of your back. And though Will Brooks was coming over to the UFC with a lot of momentum, he ran into Oliveira at the worst possible time. This was a version of Du Bronx that was building into something entirely new, and Brooks had the misfortune of trying to build his own UFC run in the middle of something much greater. Oliveira got his back and began to hunt for that signature rear naked choke, and though Brooks fought valiantly to try and stay in this fight, he couldn't outlast Oliveira here, tapping just before going out cold. Jim Miller once managed to submit a younger version of Oliveira with a knee bar in just under 2 minutes of the very first round. That was a much less experienced Oliveira, sure. However, that last fight was certainly in everyone's mind coming into this rematch. Miller's black belt level BJJ seemed to make him a tough matchup for Du Bronx on paper, but if you needed any proof that Charles had grown massively since then, the way he just picked Miller up in their rematch, flung him to the mat, quickly took his back and eventually got the tap, yeah, this was a new level of performance from Oliveira. And to cap it all off, he did it in even quicker time than Miller managed to tap him in their first fight. Remember, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to leave a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you don't miss a single upload. This one was classic Oliveira through and through. Taking on the dangerous and talented David Teymur, Oliveira managed to stun his opponent badly with an elbow, putting his target into a tricky position immediately. In fact, Teymur was struggling so badly that he fully turned his back to Charles, which could have easily resulted in a stoppage if he hadn't made a move just as the ref was taking a closer look. But turning and facing Oliveira just put Teymur's neck in range for this anaconda choke finish. And once Charles had a hold of him, it was a simple matter of snapping him down to the canvas, locking it tighter, and waiting for his fellow lightweight to submit. This was a vintage performance from Charles Du Bronx. If you needed any more proof of Oliveira's growth into a legitimately well-rounded threat, then this huge display of his punching power is a real highlight. In this fight with Jared Gordon, he managed to score a huge intercepting knockdown on his opponent, landing big with a short hook that most people in the arena totally missed. But in that moment, he knew that he had Gordon in trouble, and once he made some space, Oliveira fired off a massive uppercut, nearly taking Jared off of his feet for the instant KO. This might have been the hardest punch that Charles had thrown and landed in his entire MMA career, and it served as further evidence that the lightweight division was a fitting home for him. Shoot in for a takedown on a fighter like Charles Oliveira at your own peril. It doesn't matter how good your wrestling background is, or how special an athlete you are. If you try to get Oliveira down and he latches onto your neck, you're going to be in some real trouble. And that's exactly what happened to Kevin Lee in round 3 of their clash. He made a telegraphed takedown attempt that Du Bronx read instantly, latching on Lee's neck. It didn't take long for the Motown phenom to realize that he'd been caught. Yet another big name on Charles's resume. Michael Chandler was the guy with all of the momentum on his side coming into his second UFC outing. He just debuted in the promotion with a scintillating win over Dan Hooker in the first round. In the opening 5 minutes of this title fight against Oliveira, it was Chandler who was truly putting on a show. But after making it back to his stool before round 2, Du Bronx came out and knocked Chandler down almost immediately, flipping the script on the former Bellator star with a huge shot that had Mike on skates. From there, it was simply a matter of choosing his punches well, and with that, Oliveira had officially risen up to become the most unlikely champion the lightweight division had ever seen. Charles Oliveira's grittiness was once again put to the test when he took on the great Dustin Poirier, a guy who was coming off of a pair of wins over Conor McGregor. And yet when Dustin stepped in there to try and handle the total chaos of Oliveira, all the momentum in the world couldn't have saved him from what was about to follow. Once again, we did see a Du Bronx opponent start strong, this time with another big shot that hurt Oliveira on the feet. But Dustin couldn't work his way around Oliveira's incredible submission mastery, and sure enough, once Oliveira found the opportunity to take Poirier's back, the rear naked choke came swiftly after, marking the second time that DP has lost in a title fight thanks to this exact same submission. That's gotta hurt. Justin Gaethje had once again singled himself out as the top contender in the sport's most talent-rich division, earning a shot at the increasingly dominant-looking Oliveira. Gaethje's BJJ was always going to be a question against a guy as good as Charles, but on the feet there was no doubt that the highlight had the power necessary to make this one a very short night for Charles, and early on his power was on display. He landed some big shots on Oliveira, forcing the Brazilian to fall onto his back to reset more than once. Charles had the benefit of knowing that Justin would not follow him to the ground. But then, in the middle portions of that opening round, Oliveira dropped the granite-chin Gaethje with a huge straight punch and proceeded to take his back instantly, putting Justin in panic mode before he eventually tapped to a rear-naked choke shortly after, marking yet another thrilling victory for Du Bronx. If there's one thing we know for certain about Charles Oliveira, it's that you should never count him out. Even though he was thoroughly dominated by Islam Makhachev in a title-losing performance just before this one, when the time came to take on Beneil Dariush, Oliveira came out looking to make a huge statement, and that's exactly what he did. Dariush had his moments early on, but Charles started with a real pace, eventually landing a big head kick on Beneil before unloading with a huge barrage of punches once he realized that Dariush was hurt. And after dropping his opponent to the canvas, it was a simple matter of maintaining top control and ground and pounding his target out for the victory. A classic first-round finish for this revitalized former champion. Whether he can continue his form into UFC 300's clash with the highly touted Arman Tsarukyan is anyone's guess, but counting out Charles Du Bronx would be foolish.